Hey, listen, bro. Niggas ain't saying, man, that nigga there, woo, woo, woo. And his brother go shoot at us. That nigga brother pull a gun out on Big U, nigga.
What if the last moments of a legend could be ripped out of a flash drive and sent straight to your screen? And it's not just a clip, it's a bombshell that's already blowing up the streets. That's exactly what's happening right now with the brand new footage of Big U getting smacked in jail by one of Nipsey's own affiliates. In the chaos that erupted after the tragic murder of Big U's son, Jabari Henley, a rival crew finally dropped a grainy, explosive video that shows Big U's final moments, and it's going viral faster than a new mixtape. Stick around as we break down what's in that clip, why it's igniting a new wave of beef, and what it could mean for the LA street politics that never sleep. Y'all want to sign too, Grimy? Look at these two dudes, you and Nipsey Hussle on the block. And right now, things have taken a shocking turn. In retaliation, Nip's affiliates, who believe Big U was behind their homie's murder, just leaked explosive footage of Big U's final moments with his son. And trust me, you won't believe what's in it. The footage that resurfaced a painful past. In the treacherous world of LA street politics, where your reputation is everything and violations get handled with extreme prejudice, sometimes a single piece of old footage can bring back all the smoke, like the beef never died. Late October 2025, an Instagram live video started circulating through the hood. Grainy, throwback, 2019 style, it showed the three men laughing under a flickering street lamp. The light coming from a broken window that cracked the sound of a car engine in the background. It was the same clip that fans had watched in the summer when Big U and Nipsey were still living in each other's shadows. A moment that felt almost intimate, a brotherhood that had been built on late-night conversations, shared mixtapes, and the promise of a better future. The way Big U, Nip, and Jabari talked with each other had always felt real, unfiltered, a slice of life that the community could relate to. That's why the moment when the clip reappeared, it hit multiple raw nerves throughout the hood. So what nobody could have predicted was that within 72 hours, one of the three men in that video would be laid out in a morgue, and the internet would erupt with celebrations disguised as street justice finally being served. Halloween night turns to horror. The hit went down at approximately 11:11 p.m. on October 31st, 2025, at the intersection of South Figueroa Street and West 69th Street in the heart of South Los Angeles. It was a night that should have been spent celebrating the holiday, but for the streets, it was a turning point. Let's start from the beginning. The names that are stuck in the narrative: Big U, Nip, and Jabari. Eugene Big U, a name that echoed through the neighborhoods of South LA, had once been a figure of authority, a man who claimed to own the block by way of business and influence. He was a veteran of the Rolling 60s and a founding partner of the Rolling 60s affiliate. He'd risen from a childhood of poverty and crime to a street king, a king who never let anyone take his place without a fight. He had a son, Jabari, who had always carried the weight of that name in his pockets. But on that Halloween night, Jabari's life was cut short, and the world watched as he was taken down in a brutal act that shook the community to its core. The old Instagram live footage that surfaced in late October 2025 was the reason the streets began to talk again. The clip started off with the three men sitting under a street lamp, the three faces lighting up as they laughed and talked about the next mixtape, the next show, the next deal. But as the camera zoomed in, the conversation shifted. It was a simple mention of Nipsey's name, someone in the background saying "justice for Nip." The laughter that followed was quick, a nervous chuckle that was taken out of context and weaponized against him. It became the evidence that Big U had something to do with Nipsey's death, that he was straight disrespecting the memory of the man he claimed to love like a son. That laugh, whether it was nervous, inappropriate, or completely misunderstood, became proof to his ops and detractors that Big U had something to do with Nipsey's death. The more Big U denied involvement, the more suspicious it looked to those already convinced of his guilt in the streets. Wack 100, Nipsey's former manager, became one of Big U's most vocal critics. In a February 2024 No Jumper episode, he alleged that Big U had provided information to federal investigators during a 2018 RICO probe that indirectly led to Nipsey being targeted as a snitch. The accusations came from someone who'd been in Nip's inner circle, someone who claimed to know things the public didn't about what really went down. That kind of talk spreads like wildfire when it's tied to a name that people can point at. Even more damaging was the claim that Eric Holder, the man who was convicted for Nipsey's murder, wasn't a lone actor in the story. He had been a part of a larger conspiracy that involved Big U. That's how rumors grew in the court of public opinion, a world where facts rarely matter and the narrative of a bad boy takes root in the streets. Loose Cannon, a fellow Rollins 60s affiliate, a music executive, had dropped explosive claims in 2024, alleging that Big U had called him 30 minutes before Nipsey's murder with ominous warnings about handling the noise. No phone records ever surfaced to substantiate the claim. No evidence was presented in Eric Holder's trial. It was simply a rumor that had been given a platform, a story that was passed along in whispers, a story that eventually took root in the corners of social media and the streets. The narrative that Big U was a betrayer of Nipsey took deep root in certain corners of social media and the streets where people were looking for someone to blame. Loose Cannon's claims, never substantiated with phone records, never mentioned in Eric Holder's trial, never backed by actual evidence, became gospel truth to those who wanted to believe Big U was guilty of setting up the hit. And now, the clip that reappeared in late October 2025 hit multiple raw nerves simultaneously. The streets, the people, the family. All these people had been watching, waiting for justice to arrive. The clip showed the three men together, laughing, joking, talking about their next steps. The conversation had a casual tone, the way people talk with their homies at a break. But the conversation was not entirely casual. It was a conversation with the sense that the streets had a voice, that there were people who had a point of view that was different from everyone else. That clip was just a small piece of the larger story. But the story that followed was one that would change the lives of everyone in the community. The hit went down at approximately 11:11 p.m. On October 31, 2025, at the intersection of South Figueroa Street and West 69th Street in the heart of South Los Angeles. The hit was brutal. Jabari had pulled up to a small, independently owned smoke shop that locals called Fig in 69 Smoke Spot. The kind of corner store that exists in every hood across America, selling Swiss's sweets, energy drinks, and lottery tickets to a community that has been grinding on these corners for generations. The area sits in what has historically been Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips territory. Though the shop itself had no documented gang affiliations, according to LAPD Gang Impact Team assessments, it was just a business trying to survive in a neighborhood where survival itself is a daily negotiation with death. And the shop was in the midst of a street that was filled with tension and violence, a place where the walls of buildings seemed to close in on you. In that corner, a black or dark-colored sedan pulled up to the curb, the car's presence deliberate, the kind of mission that one would see in a story that had taken on a life of its own. Jabari approached the vehicle, and for about 10 to 15 seconds, the exchange that took place between the passenger and the passenger side window was as casual as a chat with a friend. Then everything exploded into straight violence. The shots that followed were from what was later confirmed as a semi-automatic 9mm pistol. At least 7 rounds erupted. The gunfire echoed off buildings and shattered the Halloween night air. Jabari was hit 4 hot shots with devastating precision. 2 in the torso, 1 in the left arm, and 1 in the thigh. He collapsed near the shop's entrance, clutching his side as blood pooled beneath him on the pavement.
May have been Big U who was using Nipsey's tours as a cover to smuggle drugs to different cities, and this was possibly making Nipsey nervous and looking for ways out.
I think Big U was using the tour bus, Nipsey's tour bus.
The sedan then vanished, heading northbound on Figueroa and vanishing into the maze of South LA streets before anyone could get a license plate number or clear identification of the shooters. first responders from LA Fire Department Station 46 arrived at 11:14 p.m., finding Jabari unresponsive with agonal breathing. The paramedics initiated CPR immediately on the blood-stained pavement, administering chest compressions with mechanical precision and pushing 2 doses of epinephrine via IV in a desperate attempt to bring him back. The damage was too catastrophic. The paramedics made the call that every first responder dreads. Jabari Baby Henley was pronounced dead at the scene. The Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner coroner later conducted the autopsy under case number 2025-0452, confirming what everyone already knew from the crime scene: death by multiple gunshot wounds, hemorrhagic shock, and a laceration of the left pulmonary artery that caused him to bleed out rapidly. Preliminary toxicology results showed no alcohol or controlled substances in Jabari's system. This wasn't about being high or slipping. This wasn't about poor judgment or being caught lacking. This was about being born with a certain last name that made him a target in a city where bloodlines can be death sentences. The manner of death was officially classified as homicide, and the perpetrators remained at large in the streets miles away from the crime scene, locked behind the walls of the Metropolitan Detention Center, where he was fighting federal RICO charges that could put him away forever. Big U was sleeping when his whole world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The news reached him around the time he was about to close his eyes, but his mind was already running a story that had been told for years. He could not let his name be used as a weapon. He could not let the streets be the judge of his character. In the days that followed, the internet erupted with celebrations disguised as street justice finally being served. People cheered, they posted their opinions on their feeds, they claimed that justice was done. But what really mattered was that a young man with the last name Henley had fallen. A young man who could have had a different story if he were not a target in the streets. The streets never sleep. That night, they did not just lose a young black man. They lost a story. They lost a conversation. They lost a moment where laughter was replaced with pain. And the narrative that had been told for years began again. Justice for Nip? Justice for the streets? Or was it just a story that needed to be told? A story that was told over and over again until the people decided to keep it? That's a question that people will never answer for sure. The name Henley will always be tied to the story that people have told for years. But for the community, the message remains that we should not use a name as a weapon. The name is just a name, but a name can also be a target in the streets. The story is a story. The story that should have been told differently. The story should not have had to be told differently. The story should not have been differently. The story is a story that people will remember forever. We remember that the narrative was one that had been told for years, that facts rarely matter in the court of public opinion. That narrative was the narrative that people used to keep a story alive. We remember that the name Henley was not the only name that can be used as a weapon. It was just the last name that was used to paint a picture. We remember that the name was the narrative that the streets had to keep, that the name was the story that people would keep. We remember that the story was not about a crime that the community could have used as a tool to bring a change in the lives of people who would have had a different story. That the story was about the streets, about the name. And it will always be a story that people would keep talking about, even after the name. That's what matters, that we never forget. The name Henley is a story. The name will always be a story, and it will never be forgotten. The name is what the streets need to do with the narrative. They can't let the name become a weapon for people to point at. That's the reason that the streets were so upset about the loss of a young man on a night that should have been celebrating the holiday. They thought that the name would always be used as a weapon. They wanted to keep it out. They wanted to keep the story. The streets never sleep, but that night they did. They lost a young black man who would have had a different story if he were not a target in the streets. The name Henley will always be tied to a story that people have told for years. The story that we never forget. The name Henley. The name that was used as a weapon. That name is a story that never ended. That is why people never forget. The narrative that we tell is the story. The name is the story. The story is a story that people will keep. That story is what the streets will keep. That is the message we want to keep in mind, that the name is not a weapon. The name Henley is not a weapon. It's just a name. It's a story. It is not the end of the story. It is an ending that's not a story. It is a story that the streets cannot change. It is a story that the name can be used as a weapon. The name Henley is just a name. We remember that the name will never be used as a weapon. It will always be a story that we want to keep. The name Henley will always be a story that people will keep. It's just a name. It's a story that we keep. The story is always there. The story will never be the last. It's always a story that we want to keep. The name Henley is a story that the community will keep. That is why the name Henley is used. It's the story that people want to keep. That was the story of the last night. That was the story of the name Henley. That story is one that we can keep. That's the story we want to keep. That story is always there. That story will never be the end. That's why the name Henley will always be a story that we want to keep. The story is never the end. The name Henley is a story that will never be the end. It's always a story. We keep it. That's why we want to keep it. The streets never sleep. That night, they did not just lose a young black man. They lost a young man with the last name Henley. The streets never sleep, and the story continues. The story is one that people will keep. We never forget. The last name Henley is always there. The story is always there. The last name Henley is the story that never ends. It's always there. That is why we never forget. The last name Henley is the story that we keep. The story will never end. The last name Henley will always be a story. That's the story that the streets will keep. The end. In the dim glow of a detention center cell, Big U sat on the narrow bench that had become his world for the past week. The hum of the overhead lights seemed to bleed into his thoughts, a constant reminder of the life he had left behind. A few hours earlier, his cellmate had slipped into the room, a smirk carved into his face, his hand reaching for something that was nothing more than a glint of a weapon hidden behind his jacket. The sound of that clack reverberated through the concrete walls as the hand struck Big U's shoulder, a sharp pain that sliced through the silence. The video, captured by an unseen camera set to record inmate activity, had taken the internet by storm, a video clip that quickly became the talk of the prison system. It wasn't just the violence that captured the attention of viewers. The context surrounding the act, the association with Nipsey's affiliate, and the timing in relation to Jabari Henley's murder made the footage a potent symbol of a broader conflict that stretched across the city's neighborhoods. The clip had over 1 million views in the first 24 hours, the comments section erupting in a chaotic mix of admiration, outrage, and disbelief. As the clip streamed, viewers could see a man in a gray jumpsuit, eyes fixed on the approaching hand.
Pull up in that motherfucking platinum Jaguar. He pull up in that motherfucking platinum Jaguar, nigga, them fresh ass Puma with all them goddamn chains on, and then he opened up the door. He got a Hollywood bitch coming up out of there, London Lauren, one of the baddest Hollywood.
He had a tattoo on his forearm, a subtle reminder of his family's legacy. But the focus was unmistakably on the moment itself. The person delivering the blow had a distinctive ring of a name in the background, a Nipsey affiliate, a name that had long been associated with the former rapper's legacy. The gesture felt more like an act of retribution than a simple beatdown. It was a symbolic jab that carried the weight of an entire narrative about loyalty and family ties. The viral nature of the clip amplified what was already a heated situation. Within the first few hours after the video was posted, dozens of accounts across social media began tweeting and posting comments about the attack. Some users framed it as a celebration of justice, arguing that the attack was a form of street justice being carried out on the inside. Others, more compassionate voices, called for a pause, for empathy for a father who had already lost his child. It was an instant reflection of the community's polarized stance on violence, retaliation, and the way names carried the weight of collective history. The footage also opened the floodgates for new speculation. Some commenters began to speculate that the Nipsey affiliate who was seen in the video had a personal history with Big U, perhaps dating back to the 2019 shooting that had become infamous. Other speculation pointed to the possibility that this attack was a response to the internet celebrations of Jabari Henley's death, a cycle that had turned from an act of retribution to an act of vengeance. A number of people had made it clear that they were fighting a different battle, that Big U was a man who had already lost his seed and had to grapple with a different type of struggle now, one that involved the harsh reality of being in jail and being targeted for a name that seemed to carry its own violence. Within the detention center, other inmates took note of the incident. Some were wary of how the incident would be perceived by other cells and by the external authorities. Some saw the attack as a warning to those who might try to engage in an act of retaliation outside the walls. The conversation among inmates became a quiet, hushed one. It was a story that seemed to resonate across generations of incarcerated men. The idea that a man's name could be a target regardless of his personal actions had become a chilling reality. "Your dad is Big U," one inmate whispered, "and that makes you a target in this hood." The conversation was an echo of the larger narrative that had been unfolding across the city, an association that had turned the name into a death sentence. But outside of prison, the video was already causing an uproar among fans of Nipsey's brand. The platform that had originally shared the video began to face backlash. Twitter, rebranded as X, suspended 15 accounts for doxing, while TikTok demonetized 200 videos for graphic content, leaving the footage visible but preventing creators from monetizing it. Instagram flagged 50 reels under hate speech policies, adding warning labels but not removing content that celebrated murder. The platform's actions were too little, too late, as the content had already reached millions. The damage had already been done. The internet had already celebrated the violent moment. As the video circulated, the official Nipsey's affiliate, Blacc Sam, an executive with the Mara Records estate, attempted to quell the hysteria. He posted a message that read, "Pain multiplies pain. Honor Nip with peace, not this." This message was a direct rebuke to those who claimed they were honoring Nip's memory by celebrating the attack. He reminded the audience that Nip had spent his final years trying to break cycles of violence and bring peace to the hood, not to perpetuate beef and retaliation. A reminder that his legacy was rooted in the idea of peace, not vengeance. In a world that had turned the legacy of a beloved rapper into an argument, Blacc Sam's message was a call for reflection. The conversation was not just about violence and revenge. It also touched on the complex dynamics of gang politics. Some commentators described the generational history of gangs in South Los Angeles and how being born into a family could shape one's identity. It's a lot of peace pushing going on, but it's a lot of coexisting with different gangs and sets, and some have generational history, one user said. He went on to explain how the city's tension had been building. The narrative described how people involved in recent shootings had a history of conflicts and how this tension could easily trigger another violent incident. The broader context made everything even more volatile and dangerous. The internet had become both a tool and an obstacle in solving the murder. It had the potential to provide witnesses, but simultaneously contaminated the investigation with rumors that led nowhere. Detective Maria Gonzalez of the LAPD had been monitoring the situation closely. As the investigation had been open, the detectives were processing surveillance footage, conducting ballistics analysis, and interviewing potential witnesses. By the 6th of November, no arrests had been made in Jabari Henley's murder, and the streets remained hot. The city had an uptick in anonymous tips to Crime Stoppers. 150 calls had flooded in, many specifically mentioning old beefs, nippy revenge, and theories connecting Jabari's murder to the 2019 shooting in elaborate conspiracies. Detectives had to sift through this mountain of speculation, separating genuine leads from conspiracy theories and social media narratives that had no basis in investigative reality. The internet's role had become a double-edged sword, with the potential to provide a lead but also to contaminate the investigation with speculation that wasted precious time. The viral clip of Big U getting smacked in jail was a moment that had become emblematic of a deeper conflict. A father, already grieving the loss of his child, had become the target of a violent act, and that act was amplified by the internet. The video had become a focal point of an online war that made the world feel the city's tense reality in a way that no traditional news outlet had ever done. The violence was not just physical, it was psychological, emotional, and social. The narrative had turned from a simple beatdown to a commentary on the way names carried the weight of collective history, how the internet could become a tool for mob justice, and how those in the system were navigating a world that had turned the legacy of a beloved artist into a target for vengeance. In a world where the death of a young man became a headline, the internet celebrated it as a final retribution. In that same world, Big U's cellmate slipped in and hit him hard, a moment that became the highlight of the story. The footage showed a man who was both a victim and a symbolic representation of the cycle of violence that had plagued Los Angeles. The narrative was no longer about a single event, but about a broader conversation about legacy, memory, and the role that social media plays in shaping public perception. The community's reaction was a microcosm of the broader debate that had already unfolded in the city. The video and the incidents were not isolated events, but part of a continuum. The internet's mob justice had amplified a sense of accountability that seemed to be misaligned with the truth. It was a reminder that words and images could be powerful enough to influence reality. The comments section became an arena where people argued over the meaning of the clip. Some argued it was an act of celebrating justice. Others called for empathy and for the recognition of the tragedy that Big U had suffered. The conversation seemed to highlight the tension between justice and memory and how they were being redefined. At the same time, the investigation was not entirely abandoned. The detectives were still trying to find concrete leads. They were analyzing the footage for evidence, hoping that the video could become a point of connection between the Nipsey affiliate and the attack. They were also working with the authorities to investigate how the video could have been used to further the case against Big U or to further the narrative of revenge. The detectives had to be careful not to let the footage be used as a weapon against the victim's reputation. They were still looking for any real leads, any concrete evidence that could help bring a suspect to justice. They were also aware that the public might be misinformed by the clip, that the narrative could be misused.